I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I feel like setting the mood is super important. Not always. Sometimes I go in the studio, I don't even clean up. I start my project for fear of losing my mojo. But other times, give me a candle, a little bit of incense, like all the senses, a little music, everything. The mood needs to be set to get me in a right mindset, and it feels so good. Today is one of those days. Today I felt like having a super chilled and casual day in the studio. I didn't want to tackle anything too complex. I don't know about you, but sometimes I have a bunch of ideas of paintings that I want to paint that are more ambitious and technically more difficult. I started this series called Sunshine State of Mind, where it's a bunch of vignettes of my life. A lot of it is self-portraits in black and white, like tones of gray with a big pop of yellow. And I want to keep doing that series of painting, but it's more technically difficult, and sometimes I just don't feel like having expectations or feeling that anxiety before painting. Anyways, today I didn't feel like it. I wanted to paint. I felt like painting, but really clear my mind, have like a zen moment, and doing it purely for the fun of it. So I want to paint minimal abstract paintings, and I'm getting inspiration from stones and pebbles. I've painted some of those in the past. As much as I like having those more ambitious painting ideas, I also like to have these series where it's very much calming for me and kind of zen and like a meditation experience more than anything. This is one of those series. I haven't named that series yet, but basically I paint pebbles and stones that I brought back from my hometown. So it holds a lot of sentimental memories from my youth, my grandma, grandpa, my cousins, and the small, tiny little village where I'm from in eastern Quebec. So I keep them close to me, as you're seeing in my studio, in a tray, and they're a great source of inspiration. I've already painted a few of those, 2 of which are on canvas board. You can go back and watch those videos if you're curious. But today I think I'm going to experiment on different types of paper. I have canvas paper, I have colored paper like mi-teint that is supposed to be used for dry pastel. I'm going to try using acrylic on it and see how it feels. I also have Bristol and watercolor paper. I'll be using acrylic paints, probably neutral tones, but I might try a pop of color here and there. I'll just see where the stones and pebbles bring me. Like, I selected a few pebbles here and I really get inspired by the pebble itself. So I look at it very closely, look at the texture, the different colors and tones, and I try to make an interesting composition and really focus on the moment. Sometimes it feels just so good to have a very zen, zero expectation painting session. That's what I'm doing today. I really enjoy the texture that dry brushing gives. So I keep my brush without too much water at all. I put a little bit of paint and I drag it on the dry paper. It gives a very unique texture that I try to incorporate in lots of my artwork. I also really like putting a thin layer of white on top of black. I feel like with the brush strokes and the transparency, it gives a very interesting texture. At the beginning of the session, I had trouble getting into the groove and get back into the series for some reason. I think I know why. I wanted to introduce color to the composition. Previously, I had done it only in black and white, and I really liked the minimalism of that. It gave me a sense of calmness that I wanted to keep capturing. But this time, I wanted to introduce color to it, and it really didn't work out at first. This one is my least favorite. I'm showing you this just because I think it's important to show the stuff that you really dislike or things that you think really didn't work for you. Because inspiration, art, creativity, it's not a magical thing that happens like a magic trick. It's really something that you work at, and some days it works, some days it doesn't. I don't feel like it necessarily has to do with my mood or if I feel super inspired on a given day. I think it's just doing a lot of work and getting into a groove and a flow and getting new skills, and that's how you kind of know how to make micro decisions for something to come together. And when you try new things and you're bold, obviously a lot of stuff isn't gonna work, but there's a few gems that you collect along the way, and that's what I'm after. Basically, all these ones that I made in color at first, I'm not super fond of. I don't think they really work. I feel like it's super busy with the colors and the textures, and even the composition is not optimal to my eye. You might disagree, and that's totally fine. I love when people really like a piece that I feel doesn't work. I think it's the beauty of the world is having so many people with different tastes and different opinions. For me, those didn't work, but I didn't let myself get discouraged. I took a little moment, I took a pause, gathered my thoughts and came back to it, and I went back to the black and white where I felt more confident and more in a place where I would be more inspired to start with, knowing that I wanted to introduce color a little bit at a time. This one I feel is one of my favorites. I love the minimalism of it. I like the texture that I get with this brush. It's a very bristly brush. It's a little bit crazy, super cheap, but I like using it super dry and very softly brushing it on the paper to get that texture. I love the composition of this piece, like where I place the pebbles. I like the minimalism in composition and color, but I also like the texture that I got. So for me, this is the ideal piece. It's minimal, but it's still interesting. Again, this is just my opinion. It's just an opinion. I also tried a couple pieces on colored paper, which was interesting. I had never done that before. Throughout this process, I felt safer using a background with a solid color than incorporating colors into the pebbles. But I think it's just a question of me working more at it, because for sure there's a way to incorporate colors into the pebbles that would make the compositions interesting, give some kind of visual impact without being overwhelming. I just haven't found it yet. I like these two pieces. I feel like I prefer this one just a little bit, but I'd revisit these pieces with a more minimal composition, as in less element. I feel like there's a lot of elements and they're kind of placed a little bit evenly on the page. And although the sizes vary, which is interesting, nothing overlaps. And I feel like it might have been more interesting if some of the pebbles or stones overlapped. That's something I have to keep in mind and revisit and explore more later on. And these other three is where I had a little bit more confidence with my black and white pieces and having a few that I liked. And I decided to incorporate just a little bit of red. At first, I muted the red a lot by adding a thin layer of white on top of it, which is interesting. But again, in these pieces, nothing overlaps. It's all like different elements scattered and arranged in a certain way. I feel like this one is the most successful of the three. Composition-wise, I find that it's more dynamic and more minimal in a way. But there's other elements in the other pieces that I really like. I like the texture that I got in the more bold red rocks. I like how I layered the white, but leaving a lot of red peek through, and then added some black on top of it. I think it gave a very interesting result. This portion of this painting I really like a lot. I like this rock with the weird faded edges. I think it's very interesting. I think I might have loved it even more if it took a bigger portion of the page, having less pebbles on this composition and focus on one element, that rock with the faded edges. Although I'm noticing that I did overlap an element here, but I feel like it's a little bit too subtle. If I was gonna overlap a couple pebbles, I would do it in a more obvious way, like 2 big elements overlapping maybe with a couple smaller ones. Kind of like these 2 elements, but with a better color palette. I also really like the little flickers of white paint that I put on black. It feels like a galaxy. I really enjoy that. I think I might have overdone it in this piece with a bigger rock, but when I dose it well, like I don't put too much of it and I place it in the right spot on the painting, I feel like it adds to that calmness feeling of that series of pebbles. Side note, in comparing the different types of paper, in case you're interested, this was a Bristol which was pretty smooth and I used gesso on this one. It made the paper kind of curl up like this. Gesso gives a nice texture, but I don't think it did anything that I really love compared to not having any gesso. Obviously, I didn't have any gesso on this mitaine paper, which is very thin, and I didn't have any buckling problems. And I kind of like the way the paint behaved on this paper, which is still pretty thin. I would use gesso if I needed a white background on a surface that was previously used and kind of erase it. Or maybe a surface that is more porous that I want to seal, but other than that, I don't think it's necessary. As far as canvas paper, I really liked using it. It feels very lush. The texture is beautiful. The only issue is that it's hard to have a very crisp edge. It's kind of a bit of a feathered edge that I get. To get a clean edge, I needed to have a very thin paint, very diluted with water to get more of a sharper edge, or otherwise it was very, very feathery when I wanted to work in thicker globs of paint. I do love canvas paper though. And this was watercolor paper without any gesso or anything. I worked on the rough edge of this watercolor paper and it works really well. I feel like acrylic is very versatile. It's not very finicky when it comes to gesso, not gesso on different surfaces. I'm gonna pop these on the screen with numbers so that you can look at them and maybe let me know your favorite if you're interested. Like I said, I really like to know your opinion and your different opinions, especially when our opinions are different about stuff that we like and why we like them. I love reading that, so don't be shy to leave me a comment. I'm curious. And if you decide to explore stones and pebbles and create your own version of them, tag me on Instagram. I really like to see your work. I'm sure you'll have your own unique twist on these, and it's very interesting for me to see all the different ideas that come together. If you'd like more painting inspiration, you can go watch this one. I'll see you in just a few days for another one. Thanks for watching. Bye.